The storm slammed into the massive castle, rain pounding the windows, lightning flashing across the sky. In the dimly lit room sat Alicia, a slender and beautiful girl, the only daughter of the Eastern Empire's king. She crossed her arms tightly, her face etched with displeasure and annoyance. Footsteps echoed outside the room, followed by the soft creak of the door. Alicia's nanny, Isabella Breddi, entered slowly, holding a tray with a small cake, a treat for her mistress. Alicia reminded her sadly that there was a war on and food was scarce, so snacks like this were a luxury. At only 9 years old, the princess was already showing qualities worthy of an imperial family. When the emperor returns from the battlefield, he'll definitely be proud of his daughter. The girl just smirked, because all she had was a long and fancy name, Alicia de Revetsier. Besides, the man she calls father started this whole mess when she was only 6. The nanny told her not to worry, His Majesty would definitely return victorious. But if anything did happen, Isabella would protect her to the very end, and Alicia was grateful for that. She saw the nanny's unwavering resolve, but if she had magic, she'd end the war in a heartbeat. There's a legend in the Empire about a powerful witch who only appears on clear nights. That witch was Alicia, and she granted people's wishes with her almighty power. According to the legend, if you make a wish on the night of the full moon, the Witch of the White Night is sure to grant it. Tons of people turned to her with all sorts of wishes, pinning their hopes on her. But then, one day, she opened her eyes again and her power was gone. And she was reborn as Alicia, the only daughter of the tyrant emperor, and her mother died giving birth to her. The king blamed the girl for his wife's death. That's why he dumped her at the princess's palace, where she spent the next 9 years, never once seeing her own father's face. Isabella was the only one who cared for her when even her own family rejected her. She was the only one in the entire palace who genuinely loved the princess. The nanny noticed the downpour battering the window and told Alicia to be careful not to catch a cold in this weather. The princess also stared at the bad weather outside the window. Jagged lightning flashed pretty often in the dark sky, followed by claps of thunder. At moments like these, the girl felt a terrible dread. Another thunderclap was super close, making the walls seem to shake. Even the brave nanny flinched. So the princess wouldn't be so scared. She drew the heavy blackout curtains and distracted her with conversation. They wondered when the war would end, but Alicia didn't know the answer. Then, loud footsteps echoed in the hallway, and the girls knew someone was running towards them. The knight burst through the door, urgently calling for Her Highness. The nanny stepped forward, demanding an explanation in a commanding voice as to why he barged in on the princess without permission. But he ignored her protests because he was carrying terrible news. Pale-faced, the knight announced that His Majesty, the Emperor, had fallen in battle. The nanny was horrified, but Alicia just went quiet, thinking. At 9 years old, she was now a complete orphan, but with that came the return of a power she'd lost. Then, with a heavy sigh, the knight added that despite the king's death, they had won the war. And with a composure beyond her years, the princess asked him for his name. The knight, with an unsure voice, apologized and introduced himself as Shubal Isip. The princess stood up, realizing he was from the 5th Night Division, and confidently took a step towards him. She reminded him of a critical oversight, and Shubal's anxiety spiked again, catching in his throat. No matter how urgent things get, barging into the princess's room without permission, totally out of line. A chill ran down the guy's spine. He really screwed up. Clinging to the hope of forgiveness, the knight dropped to his knees before the princess, begging for mercy. Alicia didn't even glance at him. Just because she's stuck here doesn't mean she's some pushover. The king's dead now, and she's his only kid. Plus, he never named anyone else as heir. Alicia headed for the exit, and her worried nanny rushed after her, asking where she was going, but the girl stayed silent. The princess weighed the whole situation and realized she was about to become empress. Meanwhile, in the Great Hall, the meeting kicked off with talk about the king's death and the victory in the big war. Now they gotta find a new heir. Maybe dig up some distant relative, preferably from the family's back branches. But that was impossible, right? The emperor wiped out all his blood relatives when he took the throne. Suddenly, the massive doors burst open with a crash, flying off their hinges. The terrified officials spotted Alicia's figure in the rising dust, slowly approaching them. She wasn't just visiting, she was there as the future empress, heading straight for the empty throne. The council members were stunned by her audacity. No one had given her the right to sit there. but she just assessed everyone present with an air of absolute authority. Then their attention was drawn to the girl's silver hair, the same color as His Majesty the Emperor's. The princess looked at the people with a sharp gaze from her red eyes, further confirming her royal lineage. The council members realized that before them was Her Highness Alicia, who found it amusing that it took them so long to figure it out. But their faces froze in bewilderment. It seemed they weren't exactly thrilled to see her. Whispers broke out around the table, then one minister slammed his fist down, finally voicing his discontent. Nobody thought she was a real princess, and what could she possibly know, having spent her whole life locked up in a castle? Someone like that can't be empress. Alicia asked the man who was speaking so brazenly about her which family he belonged to. Her voice, though very young, was commanding, and her tone made the man freeze for a moment. The others in the hall were surprised that at such a young age, the girl already possessed such willpower. Finally, the man introduced himself as Marquis Dermar of the Parang family, and the princess bluntly criticized that despite their titles, the minister's level was pretty low for running their empire. In her demeanor, the council members saw a reflection of His Majesty in this girl. She realized they were looking for a candidate they could control, but it was she who had the imperial blood running through her veins. The Marquis started stammering, insisting that's not what he meant at all. Looks like a 9-year-old just shut down these smug ministers. Going against her was a lost cause. Next up was Arnold from the Herdev ducal family, greeting Her Highness with a low bow. Then he laid it out. They're concerned about the girl's abilities, because taking the throne means taking on a huge responsibility. So, they're having doubts about giving the crown to a princess who hasn't shown she deserves the job. The long-running war has brought destruction to many regions of the empire, and that's a problem that needs a quick fix. This whole thing about the princess needing to prove herself pissed Alicia off, but her voice didn't waver. The Duke kept hammering on about how they need proof that the girl can become a worthy empress. The princess found this demand kind of ridiculous. But she stood up so everyone could see the power she wields and raised her hand in front of her. It lifted the Duke right off the ground like he was floating in zero gravity. But Alicia wasn't in a rush to bring him down. She made him rise even higher, almost to the ceiling, which started to freak Arnold out a little. The next second, he vanished with the princess, and a surprised murmur rippled through the hall. I mean, to teleport someone that fast, you'd need some serious magical power, and mages like that just don't exist in the Empire. Some people doubted the princess was a mage, since the Emperor wasn't. He just reached a high level as a swordmaster early on thanks to his natural talent. But her nanny never doubted that this girl was special. Meanwhile, in a border village, space warped and a teleportation portal opened up. The princess and Duke Arnold arrived through it, and since it was his first time, his landing was pretty rough. Alicia, who hadn't used magic in ages, was happy it worked, but still didn't know how her mana had returned. Still, she came to this village specifically to see how bad the damage was. Okay, things were seriously messed up here. Besides the ruins, the people were in bad shape. Not far off, a young mom sat with her baby, just mumbling to herself. Then the princess bent down to scoop up a handful of sand, which confused the Duke following her. But he realized she was about to use her magic again. Alicia wished that from that moment on, with a wave of her hand, anyone suffering from injuries would be completely healed. That the ruined buildings would one by one return to their original state, and that the food shortage would disappear forever, with enough food for everyone and then some. The villagers stared in silence, not believing it was possible, but a miracle happened. Even the Duke, who'd already seen the princess's magic, didn't think she could pull something like this off. But the buildings rebuilt themselves, the people were healed, all thanks to a little girl whose power turned out to be crazy strong. Then Alicia and Arnold vanished, leaving behind a glow that folks thought was straight up divine. They were back at the palace, and the Duke was glad to be within those familiar walls again. The ministers were waiting for them, and the princess announced she'd wrapped up all the reconstruction in the borderlands. It sounded crazy. Since the war only ended yesterday, there's no way she could have even fixed a fence. So they turned to the Duke, who'd been traveling with Her Highness, for confirmation. Stumbling over his words, Arnold admitted everything was rebuilt in a flash. He still couldn't believe it himself. But the princess just raised her hand, and buildings were fixed, plus a ton of food just appeared. Watching the ministers' reactions, Alicia didn't get why they were making such a fuss over something so minor. But then her gaze shifted to Isabella, who seemed more blown away by what happened than anyone else. As for the ministers, Alicia knew this little demonstration wouldn't be enough to get them to accept her. That's why she cooked up something way more interesting for them, but they'll have to sweat it out a little longer. Leaving them to dissect her every move, the princess headed back to her chambers with the nanny. She noticed Isabella was beyond shocked, but honestly, who could blame her? The nanny had been with the princess since she was born 9 years ago, a time when the little one should have been showered with blessings. But the girl's fate took a nosedive with her mother's death, followed by her father straight up ignoring her. And the people of the empire, taking it as a bad omen, started losing their minds. You'd think this innocent little kid had committed some kind of unspeakable crime. So the nanny did everything she could to make sure Alicia didn't feel too alone in that massive palace. Becoming family to the little one, Isabella thought she knew everything about her, inside and out, after all these years. But today, she saw a completely different girl, one who'd been hiding her true power all along. This showed the princess was special, and the nanny wanted to protect her even more from that moment on. Seeing Isabella was confused, the little one tried to explain what had just happened. But the nanny didn't want Her Highness to bother explaining anything. Instead, she asked the girl to notice the beautiful weather, as if it were welcoming Alicia. It was like the sun was a witness that no matter what, Isabella would stay with the princess until the end. Besides, despite the recent doubts and distrust from that day on, everyone bowed their heads before Her Highness. The subjects hurried to restore the deserted imperial palace. And as the future empress, Alicia now needed to receive a special imperial education. The girl had to master all subjects at once because she hadn't studied them before. It was a lot to take on, and it would have been unbearable for a normal kid, but not for Alicia. She was picking up the material quickly, and during one of the sessions, Senelet, the emperor's aide, approached her. This guy started working at the palace when he was 17, and he's been there for 7 years already. That was considered a real accomplishment, considering he managed to survive and keep his wits about him under the rule of a volatile and meticulous emperor. Now he was under the princess's command and came with a report. He made sure that, according to her orders, news of His Majesty's passing didn't leak outside the palace walls. Alicia's imperial authority hadn't stabilized yet, and rumors of the ruler's death would only cause unnecessary problems. To that end, the emperor's funeral was postponed for as long as possible. Also, the princess was expecting a meeting with Debian, who had already arrived and was waiting in the reception room. He's a mage of noble birth, he worked at the magic tower, and he was also Alicia's mentor in her magical studies. He was ordered to be brought to her immediately, but the princess herself didn't seem happy about the meeting. She just grumbled that he must have found a shortcut, since it's the first time he's ever shown up on time. Debian thought that accusation was a little harsh, considering he pours his heart and soul into Her Highness's lessons. But he kept his complaints to himself and showed the princess a magic formula that even scholars and mages don't have. The girl looked at the complicated scribbles but didn't understand a thing. Waving the paper, she asked him to explain why he wasn't trying to teach her right now. Like he was hoping to get free answers from her, but the young mage immediately objected. His explanation was just that he wouldn't dare tell her what to do. That just seemed to piss Alicia off, and she immediately used magic to burn the paper right in his hand. At first, that infuriated the magic teacher. But then he broke into a smile, because knowing Her Highness's personality, he'd prepared several copies in advance. The girl stopped fussing, snatched the formula sheet from him, and started scribbling on another piece of paper. With every character she wrote, Debian was more convinced of her talent, and he remembered what a magnificent swordsman the emperor himself had been. But Alicia wasn't happy, because even with such incredible talent, that man had still died on the battlefield. His death is sure to throw the whole empire into turmoil. Rumor has it, the enemy king used some really nasty tricks to take out His Majesty. Debian's sources were solid, so he had no doubt the intel was good. He told the heir that during the final battle, her father was on the verge of winning. But then, out of nowhere, he got hit with a blast of dark energy, and the whole area went up in a massive explosion. When the dust settled, there was nothing left where His Majesty had been standing. Debian didn't hide his grief for the emperor as he spoke. They declared him dead, even though the search party never even found a body. Either way, talent or no talent, he was just a dude. If dark magic got a hold of him, his chances of survival were zip. Alicia kept thinking about it and her future duties off and on all day until it was bedtime. But even then, her little kid brain just wouldn't shut off. There was another important document on her desk where she worked, but she was too lazy to get up and grab it. So she used magic, and the paper floated through the air right into her hands. The letter talked about kids disappearing regularly from the Imperial Palace. 6 kids from regular families had already vanished. A list was attached below. Alicia wanted to figure out what it all meant, but it was pretty late out, and it wasn't safe for kids like her to be wandering around alone at that hour. It was the perfect time for a kid to get snatched, but for a princess, it was a chance to make her move. Using the teleportation portal, she instantly found herself on a street where everyone was gone. Only the full moon lit up the houses plunged into darkness. To get on the trail of the kidnappers, the princess used a special spell to rise high into the sky. From a bird's-eye view, Alicia spotted suspicious figures in one of the dark alleys, clearly up to no good. Several men seemed to be guarding a small house, and making herself invisible, the princess went to see what exactly was hidden behind the doors. Passing through like a ghost, she saw several cells inside, in which there were exhausted children. She couldn't leave them in this awful place. The children immediately saw a little girl surrounded by a bright glow and thought an angel had appeared to them. But Alicia, putting a finger to her lips, asked the prisoners to be quiet so she could free them from captivity. Looking around, she saw that there were many more children here, even though the report said that only 6 had been kidnapped. These lowlifes probably snatched up a few more already. Her Highness was furious, but no time for feelings. She started unlocking the cell doors. Just needed a simple spell for that. But things weren't going to stay quiet. The goons heard the bars screaming. They went to check it out right away and saw all the cell doors were wide open. And there was this little girl standing right in the middle. While the thugs were trying to figure out how she got there, Alicia used her power again, and thin magic threads tied up those scumbags. Seeing the magic, the kids got scared and huddled even tighter in the corner, but the princess told them not to be afraid and to come out. The little ones, looking more like scared stray cats, said they didn't know the way back. Looks like Alicia's gotta use magic again, but first, she teleported the kids out of those gloomy walls. Once everyone was outside, she conjured up a magical arrow for each of them. By following these arrows, every kid would be able to make it home safe and sound. The happy kids thanked their savior and took off after the signs, eager to see their parents again. Meanwhile, the princess was trying to figure out why the villagers couldn't find the little ones, even though the hideout wasn't exactly Fort Knox. The next day, in the Great Hall, they were discussing how Her Highness had cracked the case of the missing kids. The ministers couldn't believe the kids were held in an underground prison, but the kidnappers wouldn't say who gave them the order. One marquis looked pretty smug, but he explained it away, saying the princess solved the problem for them and saved the kids. This shows she might be ready to take the reins of the empire and bring some order to the chaos after the war. One by one, the ministers started agreeing with the Duke, saying this deed alone was enough to prove the princess's worth. Looks like the empire might finally be ready for a new dawn. The perps were moved to an imperial prison cell and kept chained up with magic restraints the whole time. They still haven't ratted out who's behind them, and now Alicia's here for questioning, and her face says she's gonna get what she wants. She was sure their benefactor was tied to illegal slave traders and demanded they spill the beans about him. She also warned them this was their last chance to tell her everything nicely. Otherwise, she'd be forced to use other methods to get the info she needed. Then one of them, voice shaking, explained that if they gave this guy up, they'd face a fate way worse than death. All he let on was that a really ruthless woman was pulling the strings. Right then, the lights flickered and dark energy started engulfing the guy, crushing him in a deadly grip. It didn't last long, and then he collapsed to the ground, totally lifeless. But the princess wasn't even upset. It was like she wanted this to happen. Alicia threw on a long hooded cloak for cover and teleported into the village, nice and stealthy. Plus, this time she decided to ditch the kid look, transforming into a grown woman during the jump. Figured it'd be easier to slip into where she needed to go looking like this. She started her investigation by hunting down a casino, no way they'd let a kid in, and she found one pretty quick. Alicia located it fast, thanks to absorbing those memories from that crook earlier. This casino's hosting some underground auction, secretly dealing in certain illicit goods. But why keep it from the royal family? And that's where Alicia planned to find the woman pulling all the strings. On the way, some dude bumped into her, face hidden under a hood, too. He apologized for being clumsy, but Alicia sensed a dark magic presence on him, and a seriously strong one at that. This magic was mixed in with his mana, which was a major red flag. That weird dude moved on, and the princess decided to deal with him later. Right now, getting to the casino was priority one. At the entrance, 2 guards were checking everyone for magical devices. They used some kind of magic scan, but Alicia was sure that clunky method wouldn't work on her. And sure enough, the guards didn't detect the magic inside her, and she strolled right in. Inside, it looked like your average gambling joint, with tables everywhere and people trying to strike it rich. At the entrance to another room, some guy flashed a golden ticket, said it let him into the auction. That's exactly where Alicia needed to be, so she whipped up a ticket for herself. She showed it to the guy at the door and asked him to point her in the right direction. But he was in no hurry to let her pass and started giving the ticket the once-over, making sure it was legit. That just ticked Alicia off, and she chewed him out, saying he was going to make her miss the whole auction. The threat worked, and secret doors immediately opened before the princess. But they didn't lead to the next hall, but to an elevator that would take her down to where the secret auction was held. A casino employee escorted the guest all the way down to the underground auction. Inside, everything looked incredibly lavish. It seemed this business had been going on for quite some time and was very profitable. There were several rows of carved chairs in front, where a number of participants were seated. The auction hadn't started yet, so first the princess decided to look around a bit and opened one of the doors. Using an invisibility spell, she saw an employee carrying a valuable item. Only a ducal family could afford something like that. Looking around further, Alicia discovered royal artifacts in the hall, confirming her suspicions. Then her attention was drawn to a commotion up front, where a red-haired woman was explaining to the Earl that the child snatchers had been apprehended. The Count was seeing red, but the redhead told him to chill out, because her little brother had cooked up something pretty interesting after all. Watching all this, Alicia figured out that this woman was the one pulling the strings behind all the shady stuff. Then the redhead pulled out a vial filled with purple liquid. Now the Count was hooked. What was her brother doing that he could get his hands on stuff this valuable? But he didn't push her to spill all the secrets. All he cared about was making sure that stuff ended up in his possession. The woman put the vial down on the table, and Alicia, under her cloak of invisibility, moved in closer for a better look. She recognized the purple liquid. It was Kashanbul, a drug that only dark mages could create. You don't see this stuff very often, because dark magic itself is a force that drains your life and soul. And that kind of magic was outlawed. But even if a dark mage did pop up, it's still super hard for them to make something like this. Alicia started to suspect that a mage of that caliber had appeared in the Empire, and they were seriously high level. This makes it clear the conspirators are planning something way bigger than she initially thought. They announced the auction was starting, and the princess went back to the hall, taking her seat. That redhead woman walked onto the stage and addressed the guests, thanking them for coming. She dramatically introduced herself as Kira, flashing a wide smile with her greeting. Then she presented the first item up for auction, a ruby sculpture filled with divine blessings. Squinting, Alicia recognized it as a national treasure from the kingdom of Lorette. That kingdom was far from the Empire, considered the very heart of the 12th bell. Lorette's known for being super superstitious, so it's really weird they'd decide to sell off a national treasure. Kira, meanwhile, was inviting bids, and one after another the attendees kept raising the price, hoping to snag the item. After seeing that mess, Alicia decided it was time to make her move. Instantly, the whole room went dark, all the lights went out, and everyone started freaking out. But Kira was telling everyone to stay calm, saying it was just a technical glitch. She promised the problem would be fixed soon and asked everyone to stay put. After her speech, Alicia appeared on stage, holding something in her hands. She announced that the little kingdom's national treasure had been stolen and put up for auction. Kira glared at the audacious guest and demanded to know who she was. But the princess just smirked and then conjured up a document in her hand. It was proof that she was from the imperial palace, there to bust the people running this illegal auction. A lot of attendees panicked and desperately tried to bolt before they got caught and tossed in the slammer. But the princess wasn't about to let them go. By sticking around for an illegal auction, they'd become accomplices. Instantly, all the doors slammed shut and locked with magic. And Alicia's attention snapped back to Kira, demanding an explanation for how she dared pull something like this on imperial soil. The redhead was stunned like she'd lost her tongue, even though she thought this guest was just some snot-nosed kid. She didn't believe this child was really a representative of the palace and figured she just showed up to ruin the auction. Just then, the Count appeared, snatching the document from Alicia's hands. In a fit of rage, he declared it was a fake, and this imposter would face severe consequences for trying to interfere. He justified his words by claiming the emperor was dead and couldn't have issued such a document. Then, with utter contempt, he started berating the guest for daring to impersonate someone else, unafraid of the imperial family's wrath. He was certain there was no one left in the imperial family who could possibly authenticate the document with the imperial seal. Then Alicia calmly pulled back her hood, letting her silvery hair fall over her shoulders. That made the Count swap his confidence for a full-blown panic attack. He realized he was facing someone of royal blood. His body trembled so hard his legs gave out, and he landed right on his pampered backside. And the princess just smirked down at him with contempt. Then, with a hint of anger, she explained exactly who really had the right to use the imperial seal. The redhead woman just wilted like she'd seen a ghost. All her earlier bravado just vanished. By this time, night, lit only by the stars and moon, had blanketed the entire castle. After her escapades at the casino, Alicia finally returned to her room. She wanted to lie down and rest, but was immediately grabbed by her worried nanny, who was going out of her mind. She wanted to know where her precious little girl had been, but Alicia couldn't exactly admit she'd stormed a black market and, taken care of business. Taking the princess's hands, Isabella confessed with a trembling voice that she'd been seriously worried lately. Alicia was troubled by her words. Her face now looked anxious, and she asked her to share what was bothering her. Then she learned that the nanny was worried about her wandering around dangerous places without a single guard. The princess hadn't even told Isabella she was going anywhere. The little one realized she'd unknowingly made her nanny worry and promised that from now on, she'd let her know. Isabella felt a weight lift from her heart at those words, and only then did she report that the advisor had been looking for the princess. Alicia didn't know what Senelet needed to discuss so urgently, but she only went to meet with him in the morning. After greeting her, he invited Her Highness to proceed to the meeting hall, where the other ministers had already gathered. The princess didn't understand why they needed her. But maybe it's about her coronation, since Alicia has been actively demonstrating her abilities lately. She agreed but asked Senelet to go with her. This guy always followed the princess's orders without question, but she doubted his true loyalty. Then again, the emperor himself picked him, so the girl decided to wait and watch to figure out the truth. Suddenly, the subordinate knelt before the princess, declaring that for the sake of peace in the country, he was duty-bound to serve the empire's son. His words sounded sincere, which convinced Her Highness of his loyalty. But before leaving, Alicia gave him another task, speaking about one particular servant. This guy was selling info about what was going on inside the palace for cash, and it really ticked her off. Senelet immediately apologized for not figuring it out sooner, but his apology was pointless. Because Alicia had already grabbed the lowlife and locked him in prison, and now the advisor had to find out who else was doing the same thing. After giving the order, the girl headed to see the ministers with a satisfied smirk. They were all gathered in the hall, still hashing out the details before Her Highness showed. But when the doors swung open and that little girl stepped across the threshold, they all bowed their heads. Alicia didn't even acknowledge their greetings, just confidently marched straight for the throne. Then, with a completely straight face, she asked, a little annoyed, what they needed from her. The Duke reminded her that the empire had fallen on hard times and begged Her Highness to rise like the sun and protect the country. Then all the other ministers chimed in, asking the princess for the same thing. For a moment, Alicia was lost in thought, realizing that with power came a huge responsibility for the empire's future. Then she turned to the Minister of Finance. The thing is, she needed official authority, and she asked him to get everything ready for the coronation. Soon the meeting was over, and Alicia went back to her room to be pampered by her nanny. Isabella was still brushing the little girl's gorgeous hair, like 1,000 strokes for that perfect shine. The princess was lost in thought, remembering how her nanny was the only one who'd stuck by her all these years. Everyone else bailed the second her father locked her away in this castle. And now, in a low voice, she confided in her nanny that she was going to become empress. But she said it like she was asking for advice from the only person who gave a damn about her in this prison. Isabella, though, never doubted the princess's strength or her being in the right. She believed the girl could choose her own path and handle whatever came her way. Alicia took her nanny's advice to heart. She was the only family she had, and thanked her for her kind words. The nanny then reminded her that if anyone went against Her Highness's will, she'd personally take care of that lowlife. Statements like that always cracked the little girl up, and this time was no different. Before long, Isabella had helped the princess get ready for the ceremony, draping the ceremonial cloak over her shoulders. But Alicia's confidence wasn't about the clothes. She was focused on her future and ready to accept the title. The nanny still cheered the little one on, gushing about how amazing she looked, but the girl kept a straight face. As a final touch, Isabella adjusted the gorgeous bow. But then she noticed something was bothering Alicia and got worried, though it seemed she didn't need to be. Smiling, the princess promised she'd do everything to make Isabella truly happy. That made the nanny happy, but just being by the little one's side was already a great joy. However, there was no more time for sentimental talk. It was time for Alicia to step into the spotlight. All the ministers greeted her with the deepest respect. She carried herself calmly and confidently, proving she was worthy to become empress. From this moment on, she's no longer just a little princess, but the one destined to rule a mighty empire. Everyone's banking on her wisdom and fairness, and the right to decide the country's fate comes the second that crown touches her head. The priest gave her his blessing too, because she's becoming the new son of this nation. The coronation started with a long blessing from God's top servant, and it seemed like nothing could possibly go wrong on a day like this. But then the doors burst open, and it was like a freaking tornado ripped into the hall. Everyone there totally freaked out, not knowing what the hell was going on. The princess and the priest were instantly covered by a protective energy shield. Alicia recognized the chaos that just crashed the party, because not just anyone can pull that kind of stunt. Out of the dust cloud, a dude in armor appeared, demanding to know who had the balls to try and steal his throne. Then he spotted the little girl getting ready to be crowned. Alicia knew who was behind her, and the ministers were terrified, realizing Emperor Robertus Revertus himself had returned. To the girl, they just looked like scared puppies, who'd been calling her their new son, and now had their tails between their legs. She didn't lose her cool, and just apologized to her father for not recognizing him right away. Then, as a proper heir to the throne should, she greeted His Majesty. But the emperor's anger didn't fade, and ignoring his daughter, he ordered the servants to take her away. This stung the little girl's pride, because his actions humiliated her in front of her future subjects, and she boldly declared his character was awful and unbecoming. Hearing that, the priest even dropped the crown, afraid of catching the emperor's wrath. And the girl, putting on an innocent face, pretended to be a ditz, saying the words just slipped out. The emperor's sword was instantly at her neck. He really was ready to take her head because she hadn't just disobeyed him. It pissed him off that she dared leave the princess's palace and set her sights on taking his throne. Her excuse was that during the empire's chaos, as a princess, she couldn't just sit on the sidelines. The girl spoke like she was mocking His Majesty's behavior. She wasn't afraid of death. Besides, if he really wanted her gone, he would have done it a long time ago. Alicia then expressed concern for her father, who was probably exhausted after the war, and advised him to rest after his journey, but that only angered the emperor more, and he swung his sword. He was stopped by his daughter's words, who agreed to his will but promised she'd be back. In reality, she knew there was no coming back from that, but her words worked, and the king just told her to get out. The only sounds in the hall the whole time were their voices. Everyone else was silently shaking, afraid of catching the emperor's wrath. And the little girl was once again facing days locked away in the princess's palace. She remembered how her magic faltered when she stood before the king and boldly suggested he give up the throne. In that moment, she felt like lightning struck her hand, and a strange sensation washed over her entire being. Isabella, who continued to worry, distracted her from her thoughts. The nanny understood how awful the princess felt right now, because new opportunities were opening up for her, only to be immediately shut down by her father. But Alicia understood that since the rightful owner of the throne had returned, she should go back to where she had spent 9 years. It still saddened her because she had tasted that power. And to keep the little one from being sad, Isabella offered to tell a funny story she had heard as a child. She was going to tell the very legend of the White Night Witch. According to this story, that witch lives on the moon, and if you make a wish from the bottom of your heart, she will definitely grant it. That's why the nanny was asking Her Highness not to worry, but the girl didn't understand the point of her request. And she explained that she was going to pray to this witch every time there was a full moon. Isabella would ask the powerful witch to make sure Alicia got everything she ever wanted. That night, the kid had a dream about some girl begging a goddess to send her someone who looked just like her sweetheart. She couldn't remember the specifics, but this feeling of unease just wouldn't leave her alone. Sometimes it felt like she was about to piece the dream back together, but she just couldn't quite grab the right thread. Her nanny couldn't help but notice she was lost in thought, so she brought her a little snack, a sweet pastry, and asked her to spill what was bugging her, guessing the kid just had a bad dream. The princess wanted to share her thoughts, but she didn't want to make the nanny worry even more. Besides, nobody but Isabella could really understand how she was feeling anyway. And since Alicia couldn't remember the details of the dream, she suggested they go for a walk instead. She was sick of being cooped up, didn't think of herself as a prisoner, and on top of that, she had this brilliant idea. Plus, the way they got out wasn't exactly your everyday escape route. Alicia suggested teleporting, and to Isabella's surprise, she wasn't just okay with it, she was stoked. And when they arrived, she was even surprised she didn't feel anything, 'cause usually portal travel makes people want to hurl. The princess explained that only happens to newbie mages, so everything went smooth as butter. But that's not all that was bugging the nanny. She hadn't planned on ditching the house so suddenly, so she didn't bring a dime. At that, the princess gave her a knowing wink and pulled out a pouch of cash from who knows where. She didn't have any money on her, so she used her abilities and the money just showed up from the royal treasury. It wasn't stealing, 'cause she'd been working her tail off lately, and this was like a little bonus for her efforts. Alicia was also worried that her nanny had spent 9 long years in that dump of a palace, never even thinking about herself. And today, she decided to throw a little party where they could both do whatever their hearts desired. The nanny's eyes started welling up with happy tears, but she held it together and agreed to have some serious fun with Her Highness. First, they hit up Gloria's boutique, which had tons of gorgeous clothes for both grown-up ladies and young girls. And on separate shelves, sparkling in the light, were some seriously expensive jewels. 2 saleswomen greeted them, instantly laying on the charm, like they do for any customer. But the princess immediately let them know they weren't just browsing, flashing the imperial crest. Realizing they had a very important person in the store, the saleswomen immediately offered to escort them to the VIP room. The nanny, not seeing what was on the crest, asked Alicia what that was all about. The girl explained that the crest was engraved on her dad's armor, and she'd secretly borrowed the badge for a little while. Alicia smirked, picturing the emperor's face when he discovered the loss. While they were talking, the saleswomen came back with the best dresses, complete with matching jewelry. The princess picked out clothes for herself and her nanny, then asked them to send the bill to the imperial palace, and to wrap up all the purchases and send them to the princess's palace. A little later, Senelet came to the emperor with a report that some gold had mysteriously vanished from the royal treasury. Also, His Majesty was pretty steamed that the royal crest had gone missing from his armor. Now he was holding this crazy long bill, and his eyes just kept getting wider as he saw the price of each item. But he was more concerned with how someone could break into the treasury and leave no trace when there were 20 security barriers. Senelet felt sweat trickling down his temples and swore he'd get to the bottom of it. Hoping to keep his head, the advisor turned to leave, and another servant walked in with Isabella. They relayed the princess's request for a tea party with His Majesty, but he shot it down. The servants were freaking out, especially the nanny, knowing how bummed Alicia would be. Senelet decided to try and persuade His Majesty, but he was already gone. The emperor mysteriously teleported to a lavish garden in his palace without even agreeing to it. He recognized the garden and wanted to bounce, but a wide lake was now blocking the way back. Then he heard the little princess's voice, starting off with a comment about the beautiful weather. His Majesty turned around and saw the girl, chilling on a blanket, having a picnic. And sipping her tea, Alicia wondered why her dad had turned down her invitation. The emperor was hit with a wave of mixed emotions. He sat down next to his daughter and asked her to explain what she was doing, but his eyes were blazing with anger. So, the princess realized His Majesty wasn't exactly thrilled about having a tea party on the ground. And just like that, she yanked the tablecloth, using another one of her powers. In a flash, they were sitting at a comfy little table which should please the emperor. But he was just wondering why his daughter wasn't taking off. Nothing's stopping her from ditching the palace and living life on her own terms. Staying put isn't going to change anything, or how he feels about her. But the girl saw this place as her home. She didn't even flinch when the Emperor threatened he might just deal with her one day. Alicia just took it as a bad joke. He doesn't even believe it's possible, and she's not sticking around hoping for Daddy's love. She's just sick of living like she's already 6 feet under, seeing the same damn thing every single day. She wanted to change her whole life and never go back to the way things were for the last 9 years. In just a few days, Alicia had tasted something new, and she didn't want to go back. And if His Majesty hates her being around so much, he should have gotten rid of her the second she was born. Back then, the princess wasn't a threat to him, but now things are different, and she's come into her own. His words stung, the ones about her being a burden, so she teleported him away, not wanting to see him anymore. For a split second, her eyes filled with sadness. Her emotions had just exploded, and she realized that being near the Emperor made her magic go haywire. Then her gaze went blank, and she wondered why His Majesty didn't just snuff her out when she was a baby. Meanwhile, despite the unscheduled trip, he got right back to running the empire and called a meeting. The ministers reported that it's been way too long since the debutante ball, and they can't put it off any longer. This was one of the biggest social events in the whole empire, the debut of all the noble young ladies. Usually girls make their debut at 16, but the ball hasn't happened for 3 years because the emperor's been MIA. And now, this ball is the perfect chance to finally introduce Her Highness Princess Alicia to society. So the ministers were pulling out all the stops to get on the emperor's good side. Senelet knew how ticked off the emperor was after coming back from the war, and he was expecting things to go south fast. But then, out of nowhere, His Majesty agreed to hold the debutante ball for the princess. Word of the upcoming celebration even reached the princess's palace, but nobody was more surprised than her nanny. It's happening in 2 weeks, and Isabella was stressing out about making sure Her Highness looked absolutely perfect. But Alicia couldn't have cared less, and just kept munching on her cookies. She didn't think she had to be there, even though the ball was also supposed to celebrate the Empire's victory in the war. Besides, this is a golden opportunity for the whole country to get to know the princess. But the kids suspected something fishy, because this kind of behavior isn't like her dad at all, and yet she agreed to go. Now the nanny's definitely got a mountain of work ahead of her. She was happy for the princess, but also worried, not knowing where to even start with the preparations. After all, they were warned about the event super late, so there's not much time left to get ready. One of the biggest problems turns out to be that Alicia's never taken dance lessons before. Either way, 2 weeks of crazy princess prep for the upcoming ball kicked off. First, Isabella took care of getting a new dress made and picking out jewelry to go with the outfit. Then the girl had to go through some crash course etiquette lessons. And of course, there were daily dance lessons, for which they hired one of the best instructors in the empire. Alicia felt her strength fading fast, like the emperor had planned this whole thing as some kind of test. But Countess Chanel, her dance instructor, kept pushing her to focus on the steps and not give up. Her nanny, Isabella, was partnered with her to play the male lead. All the while, she kept reassuring the kid, saying she had a hidden talent for dancing and was worrying for nothing about missing the ball. Then Chanel dropped a bombshell, a strict rule that the princess had to choose an escort for the ball. It could be her father or a close male relative, someone to accompany a lady at the ball. After a moment's thought, Alicia declared that the emperor himself should be her escort. The girl knew deep down she'd said it without thinking, and His Majesty would never agree in a million years. As she lay in bed, she tossed and turned, trying to convince herself she didn't need that kind of relationship with her dad anyway. Now she thought the dance lessons were a total waste of time, since she wouldn't have a partner at the ball. Exhausted and lost in those gloomy thoughts, Alicia drifted off to sleep. She dreamed of a woman begging the White Witch again to grant her a child who resembled her beloved. This lady was ready to give up everything just to see her baby, even once. She also wished that her partner could experience real human emotions, not just for her, but for their child too. All the girl wanted was a happy family, and most of all, for their kid to be happy. Half asleep, Alicia mumbled that she agreed to grant this wish because she is the all-powerful flesh of the White Knight. Bright rays of sunshine streamed across the princess's face that spring morning. It woke her up, but then Alicia realized she couldn't remember her dream for the first time ever. Slightly disoriented, she swung her legs out of bed. Then she decided to walk over to the window, hoping the morning sun would help shake off the last of her sleepiness. Alicia stared at her reflection in the glass, confused. Her face was all puffy, like she hadn't slept a wink. Her thoughts were cut off by the sound of a wash basin tipping over near the doorway. Then she heard the nanny's worried voice. Isabella froze in the doorway, staring at the princess like she was a ghost, her face a mix of emotions. But then she rushed to hug the kid like she hadn't seen her in forever, and Alicia was just stunned, not understanding what was going on. Confirming that something terrible had happened, the nanny burst into tears, unable to hold them back. Alicia finally asked her to explain what the heck had happened while she was asleep. With a ton of anxiety, Isabella confessed that Her Highness had been out cold for 10 whole days. That shocked the princess, especially since the debutante ball is practically here. Once Isabella calmed down a little, she got the little one ready for breakfast. "Honey, take it easy about making it to the ball," she said at the table. "Your health is way more important." Even though the girl was eating just fine, the nanny kept fussing over how she was feeling. But Alicia told her not to worry so much. She said if she felt bad, she wouldn't even be able to sit here and eat breakfast. Suddenly, they heard a worried voice getting closer from a distance. Alicia and Isabella turned to see young mage Debian rushing towards them. The nanny knew he wasn't there for a casual visit, so she left the princess to talk to him alone. Her Highness invited their guest to join her for breakfast, wondering what brought her teacher so early in the morning. Plus, he showed up without warning. But from his worried face, it was clear he had some news to share. Besides checking on the princess, Debian had a proposition. He asked Alicia if she'd be interested in visiting the magic tower sometime. He said it like his life depended on it, but Alicia turned him down, guessing he'd just bug her about removing some magic seal or something. That clearly bummed out the magic teacher, so he decided to try a different angle to persuade the kid. He went on about how important it was for her to master all the secrets of magic, and that she had tons of loyal subjects ready to follow her. He didn't care that she needed to get ready for the ball. He knew she had a lot on her plate lately, so he explained he was just suggesting a way to unwind. Debian was sure Her Highness would be fascinated to see a magic circle, and that convinced the little one to agree to go for a stroll. The mage took her hand, and instantly they were enveloped in a golden glow that formed magical symbols. It was a way of teleporting too, but not the kind the princess usually used. The next thing they knew, they were inside the magic tower. "Looks like not everyone got the memo about our guest's arrival, 'cause one of the students froze solid when he saw Alicia." His sudden yelp made another student who was busy shelving books turn around, and he couldn't believe his eyes. Standing right in front of them was Her Highness Alicia, and they immediately showered her with greetings and compliments. Lord Debian quickly explained that the princess was just here for a tour, like he was warning the students not to spill any secrets. And all three of them, as if on cue, burst out laughing. But Alicia just gave their fake childish behavior a critical once-over, like she suspected something was up. She was right. The students offered to let her check their magic formulas, but Debian shut them down again. He reminded them that Her Highness should be escorted properly, then took it upon himself to show her around. On the way, he explained that the mages here seem a little out of it because they're so deep into their magic studies. But Alicia didn't notice anything different about their behavior compared to Debian, who often seemed just as weird himself. Soon they arrived at a massive door, beyond which lay the most fascinating part of magic. The stuff inside seemed super interesting to the princess. On one of the walls hung a ton of scrolls, meant for traveling through a teleportation portal. But they were all way too complicated to learn easily. And the mages are planning to write down their magical formulas on a separate sheet to keep them safe. There were so many scrolls, it would take forever just to look at them all. But now the princess understood why Debian always looked so pleased with himself. He had a huge magic collection. Out of all the scrolls, one caught Alicia's eye. It had strange symbols drawn on it. The teacher explained that the scroll led to a dragon's lair, whose magical energy spread across a huge area. That's why they guard this scroll with their lives, to avoid any accidents. Even the mages themselves were too chicken to try this scroll, 'cause nobody who went to the dragon's lair ever came back. But Alicia figured it had been long enough since the last teleport that thing probably dozed off and turned to stone. And she got curious about why they even kept something like that around. Turns out it could be useful to its creator, some guy named Ravendray. The princess immediately wanted to meet the author of this scroll, and Debian took her to the young mage. Alicia immediately started grilling him about why he'd create such a dangerous thing for travelers. But Raven loved research, and a scroll like that could help explore even dangerous territories. Debian noticed that the student's robe was covered in stains of some unknown origin, like he spilled something. Dre admitted he got it dirty when he took a spill during one of his experiments, and now he's covered in bong brew juice. In that instant, Debian remembered this juice was stronger than the toughest superglue, the kind that works instantly. His fears were immediately confirmed when that dangerous scroll stuck to Raven's palm. But that wasn't the worst thing that could happen in this situation. The guy suddenly sneezed, triggering a reaction, and the scroll tore apart, then burst into dark flames. And the symbols drawn on it lit up with magical light. In that instant, everyone realized a teleport was happening to a place nobody wanted to go. They ended up amidst the ruins of some castle. The place looked not just abandoned, but forgotten by everyone for a long time. The mages, who were caught in the teleport and ended up here too, started chewing Raven out for his reckless behavior. Though he himself was nowhere to be seen, and the princess, not wanting to listen to their yelling, decided to go take a look around. Sorting through her thoughts, Alicia decided to head back and invited the others to join her. She was dead certain she could get them out of there. Debian showed up right then. He'd found Raven, who was lost and freaked out by what he'd done. To get back, they first needed to climb to the top floor of the tower. They had to climb a crazy amount of stairs, and on top of that, there were traps everywhere. Alicia warned everyone else to step exactly where she stepped and to be careful. The girl recognized this place. She'd been here a couple of times before reincarnation, and to get out, they had to go through a gate created by a dragon. Debian decided to catch up to the princess so he could walk alongside her. From her behavior, he knew she was familiar with this place. She wasn't panicking at all and was being super careful. But Alicia wasn't listening to his chatter. She was listening to the sounds around them so she could spot danger in time. And while Debian kept admiring her cool head, the princess realized he was in danger. Without a word, she grabbed the teacher by the collar and yanked him down hard. He didn't even have time to figure out what was happening. One second he was standing, the next he was on the floor, and something slammed into the wall right next to him. The freaked-out mage tried to understand what just happened, but the princess didn't have time to warn him about the danger. Even if she had said something, by the time it registered, he'd be seriously messed up at the very least. Soon they reached the stone dragon statue, which was the final gate, and it gave off a seriously creepy vibe. The princess told everyone to step back a bit, and then she looked around. Everything was the same as before, and to open the gate, they had to overcome their fear of the dragon. Suddenly, there was cracking all around them, like the walls were about to collapse, and panic set in among the mages. But Alicia already knew it wasn't just a cave-in. It was the sound of the statue getting ready to unleash its dragon breath. To get back, everyone here needs to accept and withstand the coming blast. But seeing the desperate situation Debian and the students were in, Alicia realized she was the only one who could handle it. The cracking got louder and louder, and then a surge of power blasted from the statue's mouth, but Debian managed to grab the princess. He didn't want the little one to get hurt, so he jumped back with her. But instead of thanking him for saving her, he just got a lecture about interfering without even asking. Debian was afraid Her Highness would get hurt by the dragon's attack, something even royal blood couldn't protect her from. Then he carefully started checking her over, making sure she didn't have any serious injuries. All the while asking why Alicia was so eager to see him scared out of his mind. His concern sounded genuine, but the girl just wanted to do what was necessary for them to get back. With a lot of effort, she managed to explain that it wasn't a danger to her at all, and soon they were all able to return home. But Debian, like the caring subordinate he was, carried the girl on his back the whole time, not letting her go for a second. They were met in the hallway by a frantic nanny, completely beside herself, not knowing where the princess had suddenly disappeared to again. Alicia rushed to reassure Isabella, assuring her that she was perfectly safe under Debian's care. Trying to explain where they'd been, Debian almost spilled the beans about the dragon, but the princess clocked him in the ribs with her boot just in time. Realizing he almost blew her secret, the mage reported that they were just taking a stroll through the magic tower. The nanny, calming down a little, decided to fetch something for Alicia. The girl needed to freshen up. Despite their assurances that everything was fine, she looked like she'd been through the ringer. Debian finally set Her Highness down on the floor. And then she decided to drop a bomb. She asked him to escort her to the debutante ball. It was a shock to the teacher, but at the same time, he felt a surge of pride at such an important role. The corners of his mouth instantly curved into a smile, and he happily accepted the princess's offer. The girl laughed, relieved she wouldn't have to wander the ballroom alone. But then, Debian hesitated, wondering if Alicia really needed to go with him. It's her first big social event after all, and she deserves a more impressive escort than just a regular mage like him. It's not that the Emperor would disapprove, it's just Debian didn't feel worthy to be by her side at such an important time. Besides, everyone thinks mages like him are just fakes, and they'll call Alicia crazy behind her back. That really bothered him because Her Highness's reputation could suffer because of him. His words made the girl feel down. Even her own father never cared about her like that, so she told the mage not to worry, because she's already got the label of exiled princess. He shouldn't pay attention to what other people say, because she chose him. That made the teacher happy, but there was still something else bothering him. Turns out he couldn't dance at all, so the princess ordered him to get his butt to the ballroom and start learning, pronto. That day, Debian became the second person to enter Alicia's world. Debut day finally arrived, and besides the nanny, the princess had a whole crew of maids helping her get ready. And when everything was done, they couldn't stop gushing about how gorgeous and radiant the little one looked. Alicia's carriage was waiting for her in the courtyard, all decked out for the ball, and Debian was there to greet her. Even after helping with the preparations herself, Isabella couldn't stop marveling at Alicia's beauty. The girl wore the most beautiful dress, and red ribbons adorned her flowing silver hair. It almost hid the seriousness in her face. She wondered how Isabella managed to get a carriage, knowing the Emperor wouldn't be so generous. The nanny just wanted as many people as possible to see the little one, so she pulled some strings. Debian helped the princess climb into the carriage. As they said goodbye, Alicia thanked Isabella for her care and promised to return soon. The trip to the palace wasn't that long. The girl didn't even have time to get tired. A servant greeted them at the entrance, welcoming Her Highness and asking her and her companion to go straight to the second floor. The little girl started up the wide steps, but she could hear the whispers of the guests, saying she'd spent 9 years locked away. Everyone knew she was the Emperor's only child, but apparently that old hard-ass still can't get over his wife's death. Still, that didn't change the fact that this girl was going to be the next heir. As she approached the main hall, she spotted her father in the distance, and he definitely looked like he was in a foul mood. When he noticed his daughter, he shot another angry glare her way. For a moment, Alicia felt like a kicked puppy. This was the most important day of her life, and her father openly despised her. She knew she reminded him of his mother, but she's a person too, and she remembers the Empress herself. But she needed to keep it together, and Alicia boldly admitted she hadn't expected to see the Emperor. His Majesty didn't say anything. Now, as they were both entering the hall, it was inappropriate to air out family issues. They announced the arrival of the Empire's son, Emperor Robertus Revitsir, and his daughter, Alicia. And the girl kept quietly needling him, saying she's the ruler's only daughter and almost got burned because she could have been left without a partner. Then she bragged that she got lucky, and some scholar actually took her up on her offer. The Emperor didn't respond to that either, just silently walked off, leaving a wake of disapproval. Alicia realized she'd gotten under his skin, and Debian, meanwhile, was practically dying of fright, thinking he'd lose his head because of her words. Then he confessed straight up that he was drenched in sweat because he hadn't expected to see His Majesty there. And as soon as the music started, the mage reminded the princess that she had to dance at least once. This'll help take her mind off things, and the girl agreed. They got ready to waltz. Even though the little one was practically breathing into his belly button, they were so different in height. But Debian was more worried about getting the dance right, even though he'd practiced a bunch of times before coming here. Anyway, they were there now, and he offered the princess his hand, and then they started twirling to the music. Suddenly, the walls started shaking, and a weird sound echoed through the hall, sending all the guests into a panic. Only Alicia stayed put, trying to figure out what the heck was going on. But the next second, the doors burst open, and knights rushed in, yelling for everyone to run because the castle was under attack. Seemed like it was too late to do anything. The rumbling got even louder, the windows shattered, and the bad guys stormed in. These masked creeps started wrecking anyone who got in their way, like a bunch of wild animals. Realizing how bad things were, Alicia asked Debian to help people get out of there. The mage immediately started showing the guests a relatively safe way out, but he was worried about the princess, even though he knew what her powers were and that she could handle herself. The girl, covered in dust from the destruction, saw some lady huddled in a ball in the far corner. Alicia couldn't leave anyone behind, so she rushed over to the woman, begging her to follow. But the brunette seemed like she didn't want to leave that little hiding spot. It was clear she was just freaking out, but Alicia managed to snap her out of it and lead her away. And as they were making their way to the exit, the princess sensed a dark energy, meaning the enemy was already inside. Alicia tried to create a magical shield for protection, but only felt a tingling in her fingers. And the next thing she knew, a guy in a mask was flying at her, ready to take her out. A few minutes earlier, the knight Shubel Isip, guarding the palace grounds, spotted the enemy approaching from a distance. Of course, the other knights were ready to fight off the attack, but these unknown warriors were just too damn fast. While they clashed, Shovel decided to warn His Majesty and the princess, knowing they'd split up at the ball. As soon as he got to the hall, he saw Alicia's life was in danger. The knight managed to take down the enemy who was about to stab her with a dagger, and the girl was immediately splattered with blood. But suddenly, Shovel froze, noticing how calmly she stood there, even as people were dropping dead all around. It was like this was just a normal day for her, and it sure didn't seem like she was only 9 years old. Suddenly, Alicia warned the knight that one of the enemies was hiding behind a column, even though his shadow was barely visible. The princess was also getting worried about why she hadn't been able to use her powers before. Looks like some serious mojo's at play here, but she couldn't just stand by and watch this bloodbath. Alicia asked the knight to lend her his sword. The weapon was way too big for her, and she was just dragging it across the floor, leaving a huge, screeching scratch in the finish. All the while, she was trying to keep her magic steady, worried her mana might fizzle out. Nothing like this ever happened in her past life, but Alicia wasn't giving up. She tried to focus. Her Highness managed to imbue the sword with magic and slammed it into the floor with all her might, unleashing a wave of freezing energy. This energy was binding everything in its path. And the enemies who showed up here uninvited got caught in the freeze and were bound by the magic. Then, in the next instant, the cold in the air vanished. And when the icy mist completely cleared, Shubel saw that the people attacking them were now sitting tied to a column. Of course, before her attack, Alicia managed to create a protective dome for her people. But not everyone made it inside. The princess saw with horror that Debian was lying motionless on the floor. He fell under her magical influence, and Alicia was terrified of losing the second person she cared about in her life. Despite the serious injuries, Debian was still alive, and they immediately moved his unconscious body to a private room. She blamed herself for his condition, even though he just stayed behind to try and save people. She tried using her magic to restore her friend to his former self and heal what ailed him, but Debian barely stirred, and then he sank back into a deep sleep. Maybe she needed to wait a bit for the healing magic to work, so Alicia stayed to keep an eye on him. Besides, she was curious what the Emperor himself was up to while the whole empire was spiraling into chaos again. The answer came right away when there was a knock at the door. A flustered Counselor Senelet entered, bringing Her Highness some grim news about her father. But hearing that Robertus was laid low by some unknown illness, the princess didn't even bat an eye. I went to check on him, and yeah, the dark magic's got him bad. Turns out, after taking that dark magic hit in the last battle, the Emperor's totally vulnerable now. Now, even after a scratch, he's out cold, and nobody knows when he'll wake up. The princess wasn't buying the Emperor's doctor's lame excuses. Her glare made the doc tremble, and he explained that the Emperor's body is completely drained after the war. Basically, nobody can say for sure when His Majesty will wake up. Knowing that wasn't good enough for Alicia, the doctor dropped to his knees, swearing they're doing everything they can. And wouldn't you know it, that wasn't the only bad news today. The advisor whispered to the princess that Kira managed to slip away during the palace attack. And if His Majesty can't shake this thing anytime soon, Alicia's gonna have to deal with some serious business. But this time, the girl decided to refuse. If her dad wakes up, he might think she's trying to steal the throne again. That's not a future she's interested in. Then she noticed how beat up Senelet looked. He'd been running the whole empire for 3 years while the Emperor was at war. The guy looked totally drained, and Alicia knew she had to help. First, she asked if they'd found the source of the explosion. Turns out the explosion and the intruder both came from the underground prison. That means the attackers are connected to Kira, and they manage to waltz right into the banquet hall without setting off any alarms, which points to a traitor in the palace. But first, Alicia ordered them to round up all the prisoners, including Kira. They tried to track that woman through the casinos, but she was too clever. She left a ton of fake trails everywhere. It was tough to figure out which one was real, and thinking about it was really wearing the princess down. She doesn't know who this woman really is, but it's clear she's not working alone, or even just with one other person. Plus, the kid was worried the Emperor would be pissed when he woke up and found out she'd been meddling in his affairs. But what really had Alicia freaked out was the problems with her magic. Something weird was going on with it, like it was cutting in and out, and the little girl needed to figure it out ASAP. An idea popped into her head, and she decided to give it a shot, so she headed to her dad's bedroom. She put a finger to her lips, signaling the maids inside to keep quiet. The girls weren't about to disobey the princess, and watched as she approached His Majesty's body. Alicia tried to use her magic on him, but she realized that being near this guy made her lose control of her powers, and she couldn't use them properly. The little girl poked him in the neck, trying to wake him up, but that didn't work either. And the maids, seeing her efforts, were impressed by her care, because despite everything, she was trying to wake her father. So far, Alicia's figured out there's definitely a link between magic and the Emperor, but finding his weakness ain't gonna be easy. Suddenly, the girl thought she saw His Majesty's eye twitch. She wasn't sure if the magic had worked, or if she'd managed to wake her father up, but decided it was best he didn't see her right after waking. The princess hurried out of the room, followed by the worried maids. And His Majesty really did open his eyes. He thought he heard someone calling his daughter. But when he turned his head, the room was empty, and bright light poured in through the open door, like a gateway to the other side. Then the Emperor realized he'd just been asleep for a while, and later, Counselor Senelet came to him with a report. It was about the explosion on the day of the princess's debut, and how she's now personally investigating the incident. By this time, they'd already caught all the escaped prisoners and put them back in jail. But the whereabouts of the main instigator, Kira, are still unknown. Okay, looking back, we can say for sure now, there's a rat in the palace. Senelet was almost proud, seeing how much Her Highness was like her father in moments like these, just as sharp and decisive. And the Emperor himself ordered the investigation to continue and to obey his daughter's commands. Meanwhile, somewhere in a dark corner, a secret meeting was taking place. A few figures huddled there, hidden under hoods, waiting for the big bad to show. The red-haired woman strolled towards the meeting spot, taking her sweet time. A wicked smile crept across her face. She was certain that taking over the Eastern Empire was just a matter of time. The next day, Alicia received an invitation to tea from Duchess Elizabeth Herdev's daughter. The nanny was even happy that the little one was getting such attention, but Alicia wondered what was behind all the fuss. This little duchess was about the same age as the princess. Now that Her Highness has made her debut, it's time to mingle with the upper crust and work on her social game. After the usual pros and cons list, Alicia asked her nanny to let them know she'd be at the shindig. But first, she wanted a little stroll through the rosarium and get some fresh air. Isabella was thrilled with the idea. She was just happy her little one was in such a good mood. The rosarium gardens are the pride of the imperial palace, and the princess loved wandering around and taking in all the beauty. The nanny was just worried they might run into His Majesty out here. But Alicia didn't see what the big deal was. Her father seemed about as scary as a hissing kitten. But even if he did cross their path, she'd just say a polite hello and move on, not letting it ruin such a perfect day. Suddenly, the girl remembered there was a teleportation magic circle hidden somewhere around here, and she decided to share the news with her nanny. That was news to Isabella. She'd been serving the imperial family for years, but she'd never heard anything about that. Alicia smirked, like she knew something huge, and guessed her dad had made that circle. Her power made the circle visible, and the nanny finally saw the intricate design on the ground too. And the princess suggested trying it out, seeing where it led. Isabella thought that was a seriously bad idea. If His Majesty found out, he'd blow a gasket. Knowing her nanny was worried, the little one told her to chill there and enjoy the garden view, while she went on a little adventure, promising to be right back. Isabella knew there was no talking the princess out of it, so she just told her to be careful and come straight back if things got hairy. The kid walked up to the glowing circle and checked it out for a second before stepping across the line. The pattern's lines were drawn so perfectly, it showed the creator had amazing taste. For a split second, Alicia's gaze drifted to a small gazebo a little ways off. Then she took a step forward, and bam, she was instantly surrounded by this white glow. The shift to the other place took like a heartbeat, and then Alicia was looking at a totally different scene. Up ahead was this pretty old willow tree, its long branches hanging down over a guy leaning against the trunk. The princess recognized him as the emperor, just dozing peacefully, totally unaware she was there. And she couldn't figure out how His Majesty could just sleep so carefree, especially since he wasn't fully recovered from his illness. For a while, she just watched his eyelids twitch every now and then. And like that, he didn't seem scary at all, kinda the opposite, actually. He didn't even flinch when a petal fell on his face, and Alicia went over to brush it off his cheek. She tried to do it super carefully so she wouldn't disturb His Majesty's sleep, but he snapped awake instantly, and the girl immediately tried to distract him by talking about the beautiful weather. It didn't work, though, and Robertus demanded an explanation of how she got into this place. The princess confessed that it was no trouble at all for her. The explanation was super simple, but for some reason it freaked the emperor out, and he even wondered if she was really his daughter. His face twisted with confusion and rage. He threatened that the girl wouldn't get out of there until she answered all his questions. He wanted to know what she was, but Alicia responded by asking him the same question, which baffled His Majesty. Now, he had to answer her about what he was. They started arguing. The emperor wanted to be sure he was dealing with the princess and not some kind of mask hiding something else. And to prove her true royal blood, Alicia reminded him of the time strangers invaded the palace. She was the one who protected the empire's people back then, while the emperor didn't lift a finger. Her face twisted in anger, because a man who can't protect his people doesn't deserve to be emperor. Alicia had to clean up the whole mess herself, because her father couldn't even take care of himself. He just passed out, but now he's happy to shower her with accusations. The princess didn't want to talk to this ungrateful man anymore, and she prepared to leave. But her words still stung Robertus, and he remembered that fateful day. Sitting on his throne, he clearly saw the girl standing alone in the middle of the hall, while a criminal was preparing to attack from behind a pillar. As emperor, of course, he couldn't just stand there and do nothing. But as soon as he drew his sword and took a step forward, dark energy enveloped him, binding his entire body. The strands of dark energy squeezed so tightly that Robertus started coughing up blood, and his vision began to blur. All he knew was that this barrier was blocking him, preventing him from moving forward, and it was the cause of his sickness. But for reasons he kept to himself, he kept it all a secret. Before long, the princess, in all her splendor, arrived for a visit in a fancy carriage. She came to see Duchess Elizabeth Herdev, who greeted her right at the gates. Taking a good look at the little brunette, Alicia recognized her. It was the very girl she'd saved the day the palace was attacked. Elizabeth confirmed it was her and thanked Her Highness for her courageous act. That's why she invited the princess for tea, to show her gratitude as much as possible. She also admitted she was terrified, not for herself but for Alicia, when she bravely fought the bad guys. The princess was just a kid, but she stood up to the enemy so bravely to protect the people of the empire. Elizabeth figured the heroine herself must have been scared out of her mind at that moment. Alicia might have wanted to tell the Duchess's daughter she was wrong about that, but she kept quiet. The other girl got curious, wondering when and how Her Highness had managed to learn such powerful magic. When the princess explained she hadn't studied anything, Elizabeth was baffled, not understanding how she'd managed to defeat her opponents. Even Alicia saying she just relied on her experience and instincts didn't clear things up. But one way or another, it was a display of magic. And realizing her would-be friend was super interested, the princess decided to show off a couple of tricks. She created a small amount of golden energy in her hand, which immediately enveloped the girls in a warm glow. And then they were somewhere else, on a beach, and Elizabeth thought it was a dream. But the princess asked her to believe her eyes, adding that this was just the start of their amazing adventure. From the beach, they headed into town, and along the way, Alicia asked her to call her Milady instead of Princess. They hit the marketplace in town, and every vendor there was trying to shove their stuff at them. Elizabeth was totally digging it. She wanted to check out every single inch of the place. She especially got a kick out of it when they wandered over to a tent selling dream catchers. The young countess clocked right away that these were the White Night Witch's creations. And the saleswoman confirmed that all these souvenirs were handmade and inspired by the moon. According to superstition, if you hang one of these in your bedroom and make a wish, it's guaranteed to come true. But the princess got a weird vibe when she was checking out the crafts. She wasn't sure if she should get one, but her friend already had her wallet out, ready to pay for one. Elizabeth wasn't just into the fact that this thing could grant wishes. It had a really cool sparkle, and that'd give her a good feeling whenever she looked at it. Seeing how happy the young duchess was, Alicia had to agree with her. They kept moving, but one area was super crowded, like shoulder to shoulder packed. The princess figured it'd be easier to just teleport. Suddenly, she noticed Elizabeth wasn't holding her hand anymore, and in fact, she was nowhere to be seen. Her Highness realized with a jolt that she'd lost her companion. After getting shoved around by the crowd, Elizabeth ended up in some alley and slumped against the wall, totally freaking out. The girl was terrified she'd never get home, and tears started welling up in her eyes. Suddenly, she heard an old man's voice, and it was definitely talking to her. Elizabeth looked up and saw a short old guy leaning on a gnarly-looking staff. Then he reached out a withered hand to the girl and offered to go with him. The kid didn't see anything dangerous about the old guy and just started chatting with him. There was nothing about the old man that screamed "trap" as he pulled a small mirror out of his pocket and offered it to the young duchess, saying it was perfect for her. The girl looked at her reflection. Her eyelids suddenly felt heavy, and she got this overwhelming urge to have it. The old man promised to give it to her for just 2 silver coins. But then Alicia showed up, definitely not in a good mood, and snatched the mirror, sensing something was off about it. And then, with all her might, she slammed it onto the ground. That pissed off the old man, plus he felt this crazy energy coming off this little girl. The princess demanded to know what kind of stunt he was pulling, but he didn't say a word. Then she instantly teleported herself and her friend to a little shop with some tasty snacks. And then she burst into tears, thinking she'd never see her mom and dad again, and almost started crying all over again. But the princess calmed her down, saying it was all over and not to worry so much, and suggested they drown her sorrows in some sweet pancakes. In response, Alicia heard words of gratitude again for the rescue and a promise that Elizabeth now owed her one. Alicia stayed quiet. She felt guilty about what happened. After all, she was the one who dragged her to that place and didn't keep an eye on her. She remembered her conversation with that old guy, who reeked of dark magic. But he refused to answer her questions and just hobbled off in the other direction. The princess had no idea there were so many warlocks in the empire. That kind of magic was supposed to be outlawed. But lately their numbers have skyrocketed. There were a bunch of signs pointing to it. Alicia was pulled from her thoughts by Elizabeth, who was offering her some sweets too. The sweet taste on her tongue actually helped her to take her mind off those dark thoughts for a bit. Still, Her Highness was now planning to conduct another thorough investigation. After a snack, they teleported back to the estate, where the butler immediately rushed up to them at the gates. Several maids ran after him, all worried about Milady's long absence. Elizabeth panicked, thinking her father had found out about this unscheduled outing, who just then approached and, first of all, greeted the princess. Bowing low, he introduced himself to her with his full title, even though Alicia already knew him. Then she explained that she only wanted to take a walk, but realized she had inadvertently made everyone worry. Elizabeth couldn't resist bragging that they had been to the sea and were now full of pleasant memories. But it was time to say goodbye, and Alicia asked the Duke not to punish his daughter since it was her idea to go on the trip. Arnold Herdev didn't dare contradict the princess's request, and Elizabeth thanked her for a good day. Then Her Highness headed for the carriage. But before climbing inside, she turned back one last time to look at the Duke and his daughter walking away. It was fun, but it was time to get back to Isabella, who was the only family that girl had. And looking at Elizabeth, Alicia hoped that child would know real love and become someone everyone adored. Suddenly, Alicia was overcome by this weird feeling, like a lump stuck in her throat. Even the coachman got worried about her, but she reassured him that she was fine. A little later, in a gloomy castle, a report was brought to King Cadel Riventris, describing the princess as some kind of magical problem. The red-haired king of Riventris actually found it strange that the emperor had ignored Alicia for 9 years. That girl was practically a cash cow, and for his majesty to just reject her was beyond dumb. The king thanked the servant for the valuable information and sent him away. Just then, his older sister, Princess Karasari Riventris, aka Kira, walked in. She thanked her brother for sending the knights in time. It helped her get away. She was still steamed that the emperor survived the war, but they did manage to get something out of it. Besides the fact that the emperor and the princess don't exactly see eye to eye. She'd learned that His Majesty is super vulnerable to dark magic, so now they need to spread more of that stuff around the empire. The king agreed with his sister, but he was even more pleased with Robertus's boneheaded move of rejecting his own daughter. All because his wife kicked the bucket. But that's perfect for the Riventris family. They'll use it to their advantage. And that'll help their kingdom finally put an end to the Eastern Empire. The next day, Alicia spent half the day lounging in bed until she got bored. Then she asked her nanny to go for another walk, like her stroll by the sea wasn't enough. Isabella suggested we take a break from our walks today and do some reading, for the good of our minds. The little one grabbed the book, looking a bit bummed. But then she noticed something on the pages and started calling for her nanny, like she'd read about something totally wild. Turns out she saw a picture of fishermen and now she wanted to go fishing herself. And get this, she didn't just want to catch any fish, she was dead set on catching the kraken itself, which she also saw in the pictures. Just the picture of that sea monster freaked the nanny out, and she flat out refused to let the princess go anywhere near it. Isabella's refusal bummed the little one out, but she started begging to go catch this creature, saying it must taste amazing. The nanny stood her ground, reminding her that the monster was way too big and could easily make the princess its lunch. For a second, the nanny thought Alicia had given up, but then the little one opened a portal and promised to be right back. She left Isabella a nervous wreck, just like a spoiled little kid. He just gave her that killer smile of his as a goodbye. And just like that, the princess was chilling in Kraken's territory, on a lake in the western part of the empire. This wasn't just any lake, it was practically a small sea, it was so huge. Alicia had a mission though, and she confidently started down the path. To summon the giant octopus, the princess used her magic. A couple seconds later, the waves were frothing, and a massive, glowing eye emerged from the dark depths. This thing was huge, and Alicia needed to figure out how to bag it. While she was thinking, the kraken showed off its powerful tentacles, thick and long with tons of suckers. But the fact that it came out to the princess was actually working in her favor. She had an idea to tie up those tentacles, which just happened to be lined up in a circle, which was super convenient. And then the fishing won't be so tough. Alicia bounded, of course, with those same magical chains she'd used before. In a flash, she lassoed the tentacles, then wrapped the chains around it a bunch of times so the monster couldn't break free. The girl was pleased with herself, which was more than you could say for the octopus, which started blasting out dark energy, trying to shake off the magical bonds. And the water around it was turning purple, which the princess thought was a little weird. The girl tightened the magical chains around the octopus, and it glared at the princess with an eye almost as big as Alicia herself. Something still didn't add up, even if it was a monster. It was acting too strange, more like it was totally out of its mind. And the princess realized the dark energy wasn't coming from the kraken. Someone had deliberately poisoned the whole lake. Suddenly, she heard some kind of noise behind her. Turning around, she saw a boy sitting by a tree, but it was hard to tell how long he'd been there. Because as soon as she arrived, she headed straight for the water and wasn't paying attention to anything else. This kid was acting kinda weird too, like he was afraid that crazy kraken was gonna jump him. But luckily, the poison hadn't spread too far, and Alicia could fix things pretty easily. Using magic, the girl moved the giant octopus onto the shore and asked the strange boy to take it. She couldn't exactly bring Isabella an octopus soaked in poison, now could she? The boy calmed down a little and thanked the princess for saving him super politely, and she told him to stay away from the lake, because there could be who knows how many krakens lurking in the depths, and they might be infected. The kid just stared at Alicia, eyes wide. He didn't know who she was, but today she was his savior. Meanwhile, Isabella was a nervous wreck, counting every second since the princess went on that risky fishing trip. Suddenly, a golden glow appeared near the ceiling, meaning a teleportation portal was opening. And then Alicia herself showed up, but for some reason the return point was way up high. The nanny barely managed to dash forward and catch the little one before she face-planted on the floor. Her eyes went wide with fright, and her heart hammered in her chest, sensing that Alicia had been in some kind of danger. Alicia just casually mentioned that she had given a heads up about where she was going, adding that she was strong enough to handle anything. That didn't calm the nanny down one bit, and she insisted that next time the princess absolutely had to take her along, no matter where she went. Because if something happened to the girl while Isabella wasn't there, it would absolutely break her heart. And Alicia promised that from now on, she'd always bring her along. And then she immediately asked the nanny where she'd like to go, but a servant interrupted their conversation. This young dude overheard them talking and suggested visiting Lake Rena in the kingdom of Riventris. That's when Alicia got suspicious. She hadn't seen this servant before, and Lake Rena itself seemed kinda fishy. But the guy kept going on about how beautiful the lake is, saying it's always calm and shines a bright blue. He said the water's so clear that a bunch of nobles go there to fish. The princess knew there was something off about this whole thing, but she agreed to go anyway. As soon as Isabella was ready, the three of them were standing on the shore, covered in soft, green grass, and the lake water really did sparkle. The servant looked pretty surprised that someone could just teleport like that. But the princess was already plotting something and wasn't paying him any mind. In a flash, she whipped up a fishing rod and cast her line into the water. Alicia's powers blew the nanny away again, and that servant just stood there gawking like he'd never seen anything amazing before. He'd heard rumors about the princess's magical skills, sure, but now he was seeing it all firsthand. The guy started praising her and showering her with compliments, calling her a total prodigy. Suddenly he got this weird idea that Her Highness should try walking on water. But the princess didn't think it was weird at all. She was totally capable. It was just like walking on land. Isabella got worried, and the servant practically begged Alicia to show off that ability. The girl gave the servant a knowing look, like she was waiting for confirmation. And he enthusiastically admitted that she'd make his day if she just took a few steps on the water. And then the princess walked across the surface of the lake with a smooth, calm gait, barely touching the water with her soles. Deep down, Isabella was still worried about her little girl. But she also admired her talent, and just then, a servant distracted the nanny. He decided to let them in on a secret. The entire kingdom of Riventris is one giant magic circle. For Isabella, this was shocking news, but not for Alicia. She knew it all along, which is why she came here. She saw right through his shady plan the moment this guy approached her, not even caring about the fallout. The kid noticed his accent, which was different from the Eastern Imperial accent, but decided to play along to see how far he'd go. And now she was surrounded by a sleep spell combined with teleportation. Only a complete nut job could come up with that. Alicia started to drift off, promising herself she'd totally make that servant pay when she saw him again. The last thing the princess saw was the nanny desperately reaching for her. A little later, Emperor Robertus was listening to yet another report. Isabella, scared out of her mind and totally disheveled, burst into his office. She was in such a rush, her hair was a giant mess. Her heart was pounding, she was gasping for air, and all she could manage to say was that Alicia had been taken. Councillor Senelet immediately got anxious, but looked questioningly at His Majesty, and he ordered the ministers to be summoned at once. Meanwhile, in another kingdom, King Cadell was splitting his sides laughing. He couldn't believe that the princess, with all her pomp and circumstance, turned out to be just a regular kid. And from the moment the princess set foot on Riventris soil, she was like a bird in a gilded cage. A servant reported to the king that Alicia's nanny had been sent back to the Empire to deliver the news of the princess's disappearance. Kira entered, reminding Cadell that Alicia would be waking up soon and he should go visit her. Before leaving, the king inquired if the girl really resembled the emperor, and his sister admitted that she had seen her in the form of a grown woman, but her aura was exactly like His Majesty's. That just made Cadell even more pumped, and he hurried to check on his captive. Alicia was locked in a solitary cell, protected by magic, where hardly any sunlight reached. The girl was sitting on a chair with her head bowed when the king came to her. He felt disgusted by her silver hair, but he didn't know the princess had a magical seal on her, blocking his mana. She was wide awake and decided to just watch how things would play out. But Cadell noticed she was already back on her feet and immediately expressed his dislike towards her and the entire imperial family. The princess just grimaced, implying his breath stank. But that didn't faze the evil king, and he warned her she wouldn't be getting out of there, because beneath her was a special Riventris magic circle. Alicia was still sure that such a pathetic trick wouldn't stop her, which only made Cadell laugh harder, and he promised she'd see something pretty epic later. His eyes even sparkled. He was looking forward to it himself. He wanted to see if the Emperor was really so heartless that he wouldn't save his only daughter. Cadel was more than certain that Alicia's precious daddy wouldn't react at all, even knowing she was locked up here. Just then, the king's sister approached him, whom Alicia recognized, but she didn't understand why the woman was there. Kira informed her brother that the message about the princess had already been delivered to the Emperor through a special sphere. The two of them were standing nearby, and Alicia could make out the image of Senelet and her father. This sphere was a sort of communication device, through which Cadel showed the Emperor his bound daughter. His Majesty wasn't about to waste time with small talk and asked King Rivenser to get straight to the point. Hearing Borutus's temper, Cadel just smirked wickedly. Then he held a knife to the princess's throat and told the Emperor he planned to off his daughter today. But he might hold off on the execution if Robertus showed up in person to save her. His Majesty was silent for a moment, but you could feel his rage even through the magic sphere. And that energy was so intense the crystal ball ended up exploding. But that just amused the king. He figured Robertus was just showing he didn't care about his daughter. He kept mocking the girl, saying she was just an abandoned kid and her father didn't give a damn about her. Something about this whole situation really got to the princess. And the next moment, when Cadel leaned in close to her, there was an explosion. And the king, who was laughing just a second ago, went flying in the opposite direction, leaving a huge dent in the wall. Now it was the princess's turn to laugh, and she loomed over the enemy like a dark cloud. Looks like that didn't scare the king one bit. It just proved she's an even bigger monster than he thought. And Kira explained to the girl that it's usually the people you're closest to, the ones you depend on, who stab you in the back. She can't understand how Alicia can think of the Emperor as family, even if they share blood. I mean, she can barely even make out his face. Cadel chimed in, backing up his sister and continuing to needle the little heir to the Empire. The king told her to ditch that no-good Emperor who doesn't give a damn about her, and join their kingdom instead. Alicia heard his offer but thought it was a load of bull, and she stood bravely against the following sweet talk and not-so-veiled threats from the Ginger twins. But when Kira tried to touch her, she recoiled, full of hatred for that wicked woman. Then Caraceri promised to bring the little girl her nanny, the one she considered her real family. Those two crazies really were ready to go to extremes for the princess, just so she'd agree to be their power source when they needed it most. In a flash, all the recent events that happened while she was locked up in that cell ran before the girl's eyes. And the Emperor realized at that moment that the magic barrier had somehow collapsed on its own. He figured King Cadel was up to something shady. Some ministers advised His Majesty to raise an army, while others thought that would only make things worse. They all believed in the princess's power, but Cadel's statement was practically a declaration of war. But if that kingdom's mixed up in dark magic, our chances of winning are slim to none. While the ministers bickered, the Emperor watched silently, already plotting his next move. He didn't waste any time. Soon he called Senelet over. Then he ordered the army to mobilize, ready to bring the hammer down on that arrogant king. Back in the kingdom of Riventris, the king and his sister took their places at the dining table. But they weren't starting to eat yet, because they were waiting for another guest to join them. Soon, soft footsteps echoed through the enormous hall, and Alicia entered. Kira, dripping with fake politeness, invited the little girl to sit down with them. The princess still seethed with hatred for those two scumbags, but now wasn't the time to play hero. Besides, she was starving. After sitting down, she asked if the two of them were related. And they just got all mushy, because they loved showering each other with praise and affection. But Alicia kept pressing, wanting to know who was behind the attack on the palace during her debut. Cadel confessed it was him, and that the illegal auction was his doing too, and that he's a master of dark magic. That made the princess so mad, she grabbed a table knife and threw it at Kira, but she dodged and the knife stuck in the wall. Her Highness acting like that really ticked Cadel off, but his sister told him to chill, and she explained to Alicia that the incident at the debut was to bust her out of that cage. Kira praised her brother again for being so clever, which just made the princess even angrier, and the redhead kept insisting that Her Highness would soon want to join their little family, and if she doesn't agree, Kira will spread even more of that stuff all over the Empire. And they'll plant dark mages everywhere, plus the illegal trade and auctions will just keep booming. Kira assured the princess that up until now they were just stirring things up a bit in the Empire. And if Alicia agrees to work with Riventris, they'll make damn sure that kind of thing never happens again. The girl didn't flat out refuse right away. First, she wanted to know exactly what they wanted from her. But she was wrong if she thought they'd lay all their cards on the table. Cadell only explained that Alicia would be summoned when the time was right. Realizing she wasn't going to get anything more out of him, the princess promised to wait. Meanwhile, Isabella saw herself underwater, even though just a little while ago she was sending a message about the kidnapping. The nanny knew that she was now facing the ultimate penalty, but she didn't want to leave the little one alone in this messed-up world. For a moment, she thought she saw Alicia's face and reached out to her. Then the princess's voice rang out, and the nanny opened her eyes and saw an unfamiliar ceiling. Alicia was standing by her bed and realized that Isabella had had a nightmare, judging by how pitifully she was whimpering in her sleep. To see her little one again, there seemed to be nothing more joyful for this woman, and she immediately rushed to hug her. Then she started checking the princess over for injuries. But the little girl just laughed happily, saying she felt great and wasn't hurt at all. Only then did Isabella start looking around, realizing they weren't in their own palace. But she was shocked when she heard they were in the kingdom of Riventris and would be staying for a while. Alicia also explained that if the nanny didn't want to stay, they could send her back to the Empire. She understood that Isabella might not be happy here, and she wasn't going to force her to stay. But she immediately protested. She couldn't leave her little one and was ready to follow her anywhere, no matter how bad. She didn't care that this was enemy territory, and nothing would make her change her mind. Because as long as the nanny is with the princess, her heart is at peace. What worried her was that they didn't know what the king of Riventris was up to. Rumor has it he's been dabbling in the dark arts for ages, but even if he is a mage, there's always a way to take him down. The girl laughed, totally relieved that Isabella would have her back no matter what she decided. Meanwhile, Emperor Robertus was still running the whole damn situation over and over in his head. He wanted to raise an army, but his ministers strongly advised against it. The fact that the kidnappers snatched the princess right under everyone's noses proves they're seriously powerful. Going in there means walking right into a trap, and the whole imperial army would be screwed. So His Majesty decided he'd head to Riventris Palace alone, which, of course, set off an even bigger panic among the ministers, especially since he just got back from a long-ass war. Going up against the enemy solo is basically a death wish. But the Emperor's mind was made up, and he was leaving at dawn. Even though he felt this gnarly, messed-up feeling, it was all because that arrogant king was pushing his buttons. So far, Robertus was only sure of one thing. His daughter wasn't the type to just sit around and do nothing. A little while later, a maid brought tea for His Majesty. But Counselor Senelet intercepted her and decided to serve the Emperor himself. This was just another reason to try and talk their ruler out of the boneheaded idea of going into the enemy's lair all by himself. The counselor was hoping the Emperor would reconsider his decision. Suddenly, Robertus froze. His eyes locked on something. Then he gasped, and a stream of blood poured from his mouth. Senelet realized someone had tried to poison His Majesty and immediately started yelling for the court physician. But with every second, Robertus was slipping further into death's tight grip, which had come for him in such a messed-up way. His eyelids were getting incredibly heavy, and his gaze was fading. Meanwhile, back in the enemy kingdom, it was mealtime again, and the little princess got dragged to the table. Alicia was so over having to look at these ugly mugs first thing, and they still hadn't clued her in on the mission. But today, the king announced that all the prep work was done, and now it was time to unleash Her Majesty's power. Today was the day Alicia had to switch sides and carry out their little errand. Her part in this whole thing is the most critical, but the girl just grumbled that the king was beating around the bush and wouldn't get to the point. That's when Cattle reached into his inside pocket and started pulling out some kind of artifact. Just like the princess figured, it was a vial of purple juice. Let's just call it purple stuff. Usually in small doses it's used for recreational purposes, but in special cases it's a one-way ticket. This specific batch was recently added to the Emperor's tea. The news about the attempted assassination on Alicia's father sent her into a blind rage, but she kept it under control. His Majesty's already been hit with dark magic, and after that Kashanbul stuff, his insides are going to be seriously messed up. It does permanent damage, not just to the body, but to the soul too, because of that dark magic crap they used. It's a miracle the Emperor survived that magic on the battlefield, and now this drug is going to be straight up poison to him. Still, Alicia didn't want to believe His Majesty would just drink that stuff like some total moron, and Kira explained that spies had infiltrated the palace and made sure it happened. Plus, they'd been drawing magic teleportation circles in the Emperor's chambers for a while now. They figured His Majesty would wake up soon, because his mana was fighting off the dark energy, so they were rushing. And now Alicia's got one last thing to do. Once they teleport the Emperor here, all the girl has to do is finish him off. But the princess couldn't understand why she had to commit such an atrocity against her own father. And the king reminded her that this father had shown her nothing but hatred and contempt. That should be the princess's motivation to take this step. But then, Isabella entered the dining room and started dissuading the princess from doing something she'd regret forever. Showing up unannounced like that pissed off the king and his sister. But she kept going, saying that no matter how much animosity there was between the Emperor and Alicia, he was still her father, and if she took the throne with his blood on her hands, she'd never find peace. Kira decided to jump in and declared that the princess had already chosen this path and the nanny shouldn't interfere. But Isabella wouldn't give up. She was ready to do anything to keep her little girl from going down the wrong path. She's just a sweet kid, yeah, she's got power, but she shouldn't be used for such wicked schemes. Alicia was a little lost in her feelings and decisions, but she asked the nanny to back off. But her request didn't work. Isabella was ready to fight until the princess promised not to do it. This kind of nerve really pissed off King Cadel, and he decided to deal with this woman himself. He stepped right up to her, glaring, and reminded Isabella that she was just the princess's nanny. He said he wasn't going to put up with her crap, and then he smacked her and Isabella hit the floor. For a second, the princess was in total shock, but at the same time, anger was building inside her. She was furious that this king had hit someone she cared about. He decided to clear things up right away, saying he had no choice because she was acting way too entitled. But that wasn't a good enough reason for the girl, and up until now, she'd been treating them decently. Hitting Isabella, though, was a fatal mistake for Cadel. Alicia's rage was building every second. She wasn't about to show these ginger jerks any mercy anymore. The magic around her swelled into a raging torrent, like a wildfire leaving nothing but death in its wake. Cadel realized this kid was about to attack him, and he braced himself to unleash some dark magic of his own. But he didn't even get a chance to focus the mana in his hand before Alicia's destructive energies slammed into him and Kira. The strike against her enemies ended in a massive explosion. With her last breath, Carisseri couldn't believe it was ending like this. But the next moment they were both lying on the floor, lifeless, reduced to a small pile of ash after the princess's attack, and the girl went over to her nanny, hoping she was okay. Alicia placed her hand on her pale cheek and started begging for forgiveness. Her Highness never wanted to put someone she cared about in that kind of danger, and decided to head home with her nanny right away. By this point, the Emperor was starting to come around, but waking up was like a sledgehammer to the skull. Even through the pain, he realized Cadel had actually managed to plant spies right in his palace. Robertus tried to get out of bed, but immediately stepped onto a magic teleportation circle hidden underneath. The magic did its thing, and in the blink of an eye, the Emperor was gone from his chambers. He felt like he was going to black out, but he stayed conscious and saw he was in a dungeon, hands tied. His sword was lying nearby, and the grim walls were unfamiliar. This wasn't a dungeon in the imperial palace. Then he heard soft footsteps and saw the little princess standing in front of him, staring silently. While Robertus was trying to figure out what was going on, the girl started chewing him out for doing nothing. After all, if she'd been just a regular kid, she'd be pushing up daisies right now. But for some reason, the Emperor decided her actions could only be seen as treason. Looks like this guy never changed, still treating his own daughter like she's just some piece of trash. She was so hurt, she snapped back, telling him he should have just gotten rid of her the second she was born. Alicia understood he was grieving the loss of someone he loved, but that didn't give him the right to blame her. Now the princess just wanted to hear from her father why he'd always treated her like this. And she got a horrifying confession. His Majesty never wanted a kid in the first place. Those words cut deeper than any cheap shot from an enemy. Of course, she never expected him to actually love her. She never even had a sliver of hope for that. But hearing that she was an unwanted child, it woke something dark inside her. Hurt and rage all mixed together, Alicia walked up to the already weakened Emperor and grabbed him by the throat. Her eyes started glowing even brighter red, a sign she was ready to do something truly terrible. But then she let go of her deadbeat dad's neck. And instead, she picked up his sword and got ready to skewer Robertus like a worthless rag doll. Maybe she just hadn't decided which method of payback to use on the Emperor, but she definitely wanted him gone. For some reason, the Emperor didn't even fight back. And the girl, filled with anger and resentment, swung the sword at him, ready to split his skull open. She wanted His Royal Highness to disappear forever, so her eyes would never have to see that hateful face again. Suddenly, the little girl was in some other place. It was a bright day, and people were overflowing with joy. Everyone was talking about the start of the wedding ceremony. And getting a little closer through the crowd, the princess saw that everyone was cheering for the Emperor and Empress. Then she saw Robertus Revetzer and Cecile Bronya with her own eyes, and it was their wedding day. The Emperor was totally different than Alicia was used to seeing him. He was genuinely happy with his wife. The highlight of the whole celebration was the newlyweds' sealing kiss, which sent a wave of pleasant magic through the air. Later on, the princess went to that garden she loved so much. Robertus led the young empress there, covering her eyes for a surprise. He guided her to that magic circle the princess had discovered recently, and when the Emperor uncovered his wife's eyes, she was stunned. They were in that special place under the willow tree, the one Robertus had put so much effort into creating. Alicia recognized the spot immediately. She'd seen her father under this willow recently, but now she understood why he came here. This was where he could indulge in memories of happy days with his beloved wife. But no matter how great their happiness seemed, one day the doctor brought some devastating news. Turns out the Empress couldn't have kids, and that was a real blow to both of them. But Cecile tried not to lose hope. I mean, these things happen. Plus, she'd always been kind of delicate health-wise. She just felt awful for the Emperor who needed an heir. But Robertus saw things differently. All he needed was his precious wife. Nothing else mattered. Still, the Empress wasn't ready to give up, and one night she prayed to the White Night Witch. She wanted a child, just to see him or her even once. Cecile believed that deep down the Emperor wanted a kid too, and she hoped that child would feel his love, the same way he gave it to her. More than anything, the Empress dreamed of having a happy, complete family. She wanted her child and her husband to always be happy, and suddenly, moonlight streamed down, enveloping her entire body. Alicia finally realized she'd done something truly unforgivable back then. It also dawned on her that a lot of stuff had been weird before. Thinking about the Emperor, she understood she could wipe more than just him off the map. She could take out the entire Eastern Empire. But for some reason, she just ignored all the red flags like nothing was happening. Cecile and Robertus both grew up not knowing what a real family was. That's why the Empress desperately wanted their kid to be the most loved in the world. The princess understood why Cecile craved that so much. She wanted to know what it felt like to be loved too. That's why she put a restriction on herself with a spell, all for the sake of that wish. Things were going pretty smoothly, but her magic came roaring back when she heard about the usurper kicking the bucket. Her powers faltered in unison, as if proving Alicia could never actually hurt him. That crushing feeling always hit the girl hard whenever she felt utterly unwanted. The night the little one was born, the Empress collapsed and couldn't even speak properly. The doctors grimly predicted Her Majesty had only one night left, and Robertus was beside himself, begging his wife not to leave him because he couldn't live without her. He was already starting to resent the child, thinking Cecil got sick because of her. But Her Majesty pleaded with her husband not to reject their child and to love her with all his heart, just as he loved her. Robertus remembered that a miraculous herb grew in the Black Forest of the Western Empire. This herb could cure any illness, and he was determined to find it at all costs for his beloved wife. When Cecil was left alone, Alicia stood by her bed, but no one could see her at that moment. The Empress's exhausted face made it clear she was living her final hours. Then, out of nowhere, she turned her head toward the little girl and looked her straight in the eyes. Alicia realized Cecile could see her and asked if she regretted that wish now. The Empress countered, saying those 9 months she carried the little girl were the happiest of her life. And finally, she asked the girl not to worry about anything and to live a happy life. Cecile left this world happy because her wish had come true. Now, after meeting with the Emperor, the princess herself collapsed, but the doctor couldn't find anything seriously wrong with her. He guessed the little one simply passed out from the shock of it all. The Emperor was also standing by the girl's bedside. He remembered how she'd swung a sword at him with hatred, ready to take him out without a trial. Alicia was heartbroken by his lack of love, but Robertus just couldn't bring himself to love her. After all, she was the reason his beloved wife died. But at the same time, she was Cecil's child, so His Majesty couldn't just hate the kid and, deal with her. So he just sent the little one far away to the princess's palace. And the whole time, he didn't visit not because he didn't want to, but because he was afraid he'd grow to resent her if he got close. Robertus couldn't stop thinking about the kid either, so he watched her from afar. She grew up a normal girl, and the Emperor hoped she'd understand everything someday, and then he left for war. But returning 3 years later, when he came face to face with her, he didn't see the look of a normal kid in her eyes. And it wasn't an act. Alicia even spoke like someone who'd been through a lot and seen some things. Robertus realized his daughter wasn't even hoping for his love anymore. Maybe she doesn't even see him as her father anymore, and that's mostly on him. But the Emperor realized this way too late. He understood that up until now, the little girl had desperately hoped her father would finally come to her and love her like his own child. And it all ended with her now lying in bed, just like his wife did back then. Robertus was furious at the doctor for not being able to heal the little one. But she was generally healthy. Her condition couldn't be diagnosed as an illness. It was more from severe stress. However, the doctor shuddered all over when he saw the Emperor draw his sword. Robertus was really going to take his head off for the bad news, but Senelet stopped him just in time. The assistant's action only made the Emperor even angrier. But Senelet reminded him that this man was the greatest healer in the Empire, and no one else could properly assess the princess's condition. Robertus knew it too, and fighting his rage, he hurled his sword to the floor before his hand could tremble. We still gotta figure out what put Her Highness in this state, and they've ruled out dark magic. Right now, all we can do is wait for the princess to wake up from this deep sleep on her own. Robertus felt different now, like his conscience was getting to him. So he asked Senelet to summon the best mages to create a teleportation circle. The Emperor decided to head to the Western Empire, specifically that section of the Black Forest where the healing herb grows. He didn't get a chance to use this method last time, but now he didn't want to waste a single minute. After a while, the princess opened her eyes, not immediately understanding where she was. A sharp headache made it hard to think clearly, like she'd suffered a serious concussion. Right then, Alicia heard the worried voices of Debian and the doctor, who were watching over her bed. The teacher told her to stay put, but their worry just freaked Alicia out more, and she demanded to know what was going on. And Debian relayed the Emperor's promise. If the princess wasn't awake by the time he got back, he'd, face the ultimate consequence. The girl thought her dad had totally lost it, but then the nanny came in, even more worried than everyone else. Then Alicia wanted to know where His Majesty the Emperor had actually gone, and they told her that Robertus had gone to the western part of the empire to find a rare healing herb. Hearing that her father had gone back to that cursed forest, the princess got seriously worried. The Emperor, just like he planned, headed into the cursed forest with the mage who controlled the portal. Upon arrival, His Majesty told the guy to just stay put and not get in the way. And then he geared up to head into the deepest, darkest part of the woods. This forest is covered in poisonous fog and guarded by a monstrous beast. 9 years ago, this place was a total no-go zone because of some freaky power, but Robertus just marched right in. Then, this creepy growl echoes out, and a bunch of monster wolves step into his path. They were ready to sink their fangs into this outsider, but His Majesty bravely pulled out his sword. And with a few quick moves, he took care of those attacking beasts real fast. But that was just the warm-up, because a whole pack, way bigger than the first, showed up. It wasn't just wolves coming at him either. There were giant bugs as big as people, but Robertus handled them too. When the monster onslaught finally stopped, the Emperor continued on towards his destination, and soon enough he found that precious sprout that could heal Alicia. This legendary herb grew at the base of a massive tree, and His Majesty reached out to pluck a few stems. Suddenly, the leaves rustled and thick vines dropped down, scratching the Emperor's face. He realized another plant was guarding the good stuff and decided to take care of the problem the only way he knew how. He swung his sword like a madman, left and right. The vines gave way a little, but they wouldn't back down completely, trying to get at him from all sides. Just when Robertus could almost reach the plant he wanted, a powerful shield suddenly popped up in front of him. It even knocked the Emperor back a step, and just then, a chill ran down his spine as he sensed something dangerous coming his way. For the first time since he became a swordmaster, he felt death breathing down his neck. The Emperor couldn't afford to screw up, not until he saved Alicia. So he had to bail, and he bolted back towards the portal. But the thorny vines were reaching after him, trying to grab him and keep him from leaving. He could already see the blue circle on the horizon and the mage standing guard. The Emperor barked an order to head back to the palace, and they barely made it across the threshold. Alicia was feeling a little better and agreed to eat some nourishing broth that the nanny had made. Just then, the space around her bed warped, and Robertus and the mage appeared, making Senelette even more anxious. The princess was curious how these two guys managed to make it back from the dark forest in one piece. But her thoughts were cut short by the Emperor's shout when he saw that his daughter had woken up. Suddenly, the ground shook, and even the thick castle walls were hit with an ominous vibration. The magic teacher and Isabella got worried, thinking it was a sudden earthquake. But the princess figured out that His Majesty must have touched the world tree while he was in the dark forest. The Emperor didn't want to admit it, he just stayed quiet. But you could tell by his face that's exactly what happened, and now they were in deep trouble. The night sky, covered in black clouds, suddenly seemed to rip open, and a massive bolt of lightning tore through the air. The boom that followed was so loud it made everyone's ears ring. Only the princess stayed calm, telling the Emperor to evacuate everyone now. He needed to hide himself too and stay out of sight no matter what. Lightning struck somewhere in the middle of the castle and energy surged everywhere. It also cracked the ceiling, revealing a floating boy with pointed ears. It was clear he wasn't here to play nice, so the princess used her magic to put up a protective barrier. Then the boy turned to Alicia, saying he hadn't sensed her power in the moonlight lately. This was some guy named Karshan. And today he wasn't here for the White Moon Witch. He wanted the lowlife in the Emperor's robes. Turns out Robertus didn't just touch the world tree. He tried to stab its branches with a sword. The princess realized her father's stupidity had landed them in deep trouble, and the empire could burn to the ground today. And Pointy Ears kept demanding we hand over the guy who messed up, saying we absolutely couldn't cover for him. But Alicia couldn't do that because, well, he's still her dad, you know? So she tried to steer the conversation in a different direction, to distract Karshan from the Emperor. It worked, and now the kid wanted to test her powers since it had been ages since they last met. While they were talking, everyone else managed to get out of there. Karshan got ready to attack, and he was radiating so much dark magic it stunk to high heaven. But the princess wasn't backing down and prepared to teach this unwelcome guest a lesson. Using her magic, she rose into the sky. Then she started shrouding herself in magical energy, planning to knock this kid out with one hit. She didn't just want to beat him in a fight. Alicia wanted to wipe the floor with him, so he'd never set foot on their land again. The princess was about to make him pay for the chaos he caused and for wrecking someone else's imperial palace. All the girl got in response was a dark energy arrow flying straight at her, but she managed to react just in time. And that arrow, hitting the princess's palm, instantly shattered into pieces. That wasn't the only attack. A bunch of arrows were aimed at the girl, but she blocked them all without a scratch. Then things quieted down a little, and when the smoke cleared, Karshana was nowhere to be seen. And while the princess was peering into the darkness above, suddenly, the kid popped up and swung, but Alicia dodged it, and he only managed to cut off a lock of her hair. That seemed to piss her off even more than if he'd actually hurt her. Her Highness promised to end him the second she caught him, but he wasn't planning on getting caught. Meanwhile, he was gearing up for another attack, already twisting a serious ball of dark energy in his hands. This was one of his signature moves. The guy was really going all out. But just as the princess was getting ready to block the attack, the Emperor suddenly stepped in front of her, shielding her with his body. This totally shocked the kid. She definitely wasn't expecting that from His Majesty. Before she could even fully process it, Robertus dropped to his knees, taking the blast of dark energy head-on. Only his arm was wounded, but the pain was still intense, and Alicia screamed for a healer. Isabella and Senelette rushed over immediately, deciding to get His Majesty away from there first. And the battle between the evil kid and the princess was temporarily put on hold. But Alicia still couldn't help herself and smacked him upside the head like a naughty schoolboy. Glancing at the Emperor, who was being fussed over by the servants, the girl felt something strange. Looks like she talked Karshan out of doing anything stupid, and they hauled Robertus back to his room. He looked even weaker than before, barely able to groan in pain, but Alicia picked up on something. From now on, even standing next to His Royal Highness, she can control her mana. And there's no guarantee Robertus will survive Karshan's attack, seeing as he's way stronger than Cattle. And since the wound was inflicted with dark energy, neither a healer nor a mage from the tower can fix him. Only Karshan himself, who caused the wound, can deal with it. Or Princess Alicia, who possesses incredible power. But the resentment hadn't completely faded, and the girl left his room. She teleported to where Karshan was, looking perfectly calm and peaceful. He wasn't surprised to see an old acquaintance and wondered what she was planning to do with the Emperor. From her grumbling, the kid knew she wasn't going to heal their dad, even though she was just yapping about blood ties. So he started ragging on her, saying it wasn't just her body that got a makeover, but her brain too. But Alicia wasn't in the mood for his wisecracks. And she reminded him that Karshan himself just made a deal with Cadell, who's been a real pain in her neck. But Karshan told her to stick to the subject and asked again what she was going to do about His Majesty. I mean, she can't just leave him like that and chill while he kicks the bucket, right? Still, it was pretty wild how the Emperor lasted this long after taking a hit like that. The princess was fed up with the chatter and decided to head back to her place. As a parting shot, she just made a snarky comment about the kid's rotten personality, always trying to get under her skin. And watching her go, he realized Robertus was one lucky guy, 'cause he's got a daughter who's gonna save his life.